Okay, and we're live. You're like, why do we have a countdown? It's because sometimes things start and sometimes they don't on time. Welcome, everybody.
I'm Miriam, co-founder and COO of Keto Chow. Check us out at ketochow.xyz.
I'm Chris, also a co-founder, president, and the technical guy behind Keto Chow, which means I get to set up these live streams. And if you're brand new to Keto Chow, we have a couple products we created to help make doing a keto diet easier. Our main product is a complete keto meal that you can customize to fit the macros that work best for you. We also have some electrolytes that are awesome.
We do this live stream to keep you updated on all of our Keto Chow happenings, to help us be accountable, stay on track, and have you with us on our journey. So thanks for joining us. And today, we are so lucky we have people joining us live.
That's right. We've got Dave and we got Siobhan. How's it going, guys?
It's going good for me. I don't know about Dave.
It's going fantastic. Thanks for having us.
Okay. Well, thank you for agreeing to come on. So this was kind of okay. So to give everybody a recap, I guess I should switch over to the chat tab.
See if anybody's there.
Yeah. Oh, like a lot of people are there. By the way, Dave, you should check your stream and make sure it's working.
It's not.
It's not?
Yeah, I do have my YouTube channel up, and I was keeping an eye on it to see if it started coming through. And I do have like 17 people waiting already. So I may want to either cancel the video, or if I guess if we can't actually figure out how to pipe it in, then that might be the better route. So
burn it. Okay, sorry about that.
We gave it a shot. We
tried. Anyway, so for any of you who don't know let's start with Siobhan.
Why me?
Can we start with Siobhan? Okay, fine. We'll start with Dave. For any of you who don't know Dave Feldman, Dave Feldman is a software engineer still, right? Kind of. I mean, you write software every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, I complain to Siobhan about this all the time. I actually miss writing code because as obstinate and as mean and as cruel as technology can be, it's really pretty nice compared to the nutrition space.
That's true. So Dave is a software engineer. We'll still give you that title, right?
Yeah. I think it's.
How about an engineer? Engineer, just generic.
I respond to both. That's for sure.
Yeah, you drive trains. And when you started a keto diet quite some time ago, and you were feeling fantastic, right?
Yep.
And your doctor was like, well, everything's great except your cholesterol is just terrible. You need to stop.
Through the roof.
Dave's like, no, but I feel so good. Let me try some stuff and see if it gets better. And it got worse.
Yeah, I mean, to set the stage a little bit, I actually was already, as so many engineers are, we're already obsessed with the data in the first place. So I actually had a hold of the data before my doctor did. I was so anxious to get the blood work, and I finally get it back. And yes, indeed, I felt better, and I thought that all my blood work would be better because of how great I felt. And I was even prepared for the possibility that there'd be higher cholesterol because I already knew that was common in the low carb space. But yeah, my cholesterol shot through the roof. And then past that point, I became obsessed with learning everything I could about cholesterol. And then I started doing some experiments, and well, there's no good way to make that long story short. Let's just say I've done lots of experiments around cholesterol and lipids and really a lot of other things. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Now, if the people watching, once again, you don't know who Dave is, if you go to cholesterolcode.com, he has a very good pinned post at the very top that kind of gives the rundown, starts with everything. Anyway, Dave and Siobhan also run a website called ownyourlabs.com, where you can go on and order your own blood tests. And the cool thing about that is, when you do that, one of the options is I want to share my data and have it anonymized so that it can be part of like a more information. Oh my gosh, Mino, speak good. It can help enrich the scientific knowledge in the low carb community. And because Dave, I remember you saying that one of your biggest problems was you just didn't have a lot of the raw data.
Yes,
but that was then. And now you have quite a bit of data, right?
Yeah, well, certainly I have a lot of data on myself, a lot of the data that I've been able to amass. But to your point, part of why Siobhan and I wanted to set up Own Your Labs is that there's not a lot of data available for everyone. Like the problem is that we're right now trying to jump through a lot of hoops to get data that's available to, bona fide researchers. But as you know, a lot of people, yourself, myself included, Siobhan included, we are fans of not just collecting the data ourselves, but making it available for other people to analyze and to develop their own insights on, for which they can sometimes develop insights that no one's thinking of. And we give that ability to other people to help advance citizen science overall, as they can submit their anonymized data. So they, it's their labs, a little bit of their demographic work, but we take out their name, their date of birth and city, so that it helps, further de-identify them. But they're added to this pool, this larger pool of other people who are likewise volunteering data. And Siobhan, you know a little bit better. I mean, we have of the people who come to Own Your Labs, it's easily in the 90 percentile of those people who do volunteer, make their data available anonymously, right?
I'd say 85 to 90%. And a lot of the times when they don't, it's because they forgot to.
Oh, yeah. Well, you also get a discount with Own Your Labs if you do it that way.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to give you a warning. Peter Ballerstedt is on. So,
hi, Peter. Hi, Peter.
Just glad I stumbled onto this. Now, Siobhan, you kind of, so we actually got to meet you way back in 2017 at Keto Fest.
Yep. Keto
and back
Fest
then, you were just...
It's kind of like where it all started. It's where I met Amber. It's where I met Dave. It's where I met you guys. It's where I met...
Then we got to meet you at Low Carb Breckenridge, too. Mm-hmm. That was awesome.
Yeah, where I did my first, mini presentation type of thing.
Yep. And so how do you work into all this? Now, Dave mentioned some stuff before, but let's hear your stuff. Come on.
You introduced Dave, but she has to introduce herself.
Yeah, exactly. I was really curious about how you were going to describe me. Basically, I'm Dave's right hand, so if he doesn't have time to do stuff, then usually I'm the one doing it. And then I'm also a senior researcher at Cholesterol Code. So I do a whole bunch of deep dives on various topics. I have some write-ups there as well. I do presentations now. When I met Dave at Keto Fest, it was, magic.
That's right. Okay, so now one of the reasons why we wanted to do this live stream was Dave has a problem in that there's Dave and there's Siobhan. And to get more experiments, because again, for those of you who don't know, Dave and Siobhan like to do a lot of experiments on themselves with nutrition and figuring out how things affect the body, what it does to cholesterol. If you're not familiar with Dave and you're going in for a life insurance exam, you might want to check out the Feldman protocol, just saying. Because, well, among other things, was the discovery that you can radically change the lipid panels within a matter of days just by what you eat, which is really cool stuff. And I tell it to every phlebotomist who ever takes my blood.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
Not as many as Dave.
Not as many as Dave. Well, Dave has his preferred phlebotomist. I get stuck with whatever.
Probably sends his
I cannot. It's like having children, though. I can't pick favorites. So if you're watching, I don't have any running list. I love you all equally.
But so Dave, there's only so many of Dave and Siobhan, and he always runs into this problem of you just can't only do so many experiments. And several months ago, Dave wanted to do an experiment about the effects of the body of extra virgin olive oil versus butter. Dave, can you tell the people why you wanted to do that?
Yeah, well, of course, as is commonly discussed, there's the one way to lower your total and LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, is to replace saturated fat with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fat. And very distinctively, people will say, try to have less butter and have more extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
That extra virgin olive oil is kind of the one good way to get more saturated fat out of your diet if you have more of that as your base of it. And to be sure, as I say this, I don't mean replace every single form of fat you have with extra virgin olive oil. But that's exactly the kind of experiment I wanted to do. And this is one place where Keto Chow is great, because from an experimental standpoint, I ideally want to have a true meal replacement that ticks off all the boxes on nutrition completion, while having the source of the fat, which is our intervention, be the only thing that changes. And in that regard, you and I connected really, I mean, both you and I knew each other when we were both kind of in obscurity.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
we both kind of were collaborating a lot, and I liked Keto Chow back then for the very same reason. But something that hopefully a lot of the people watching this now who know you know, but for people who may know my channel but not know you, may not realize, is you actually have accumulated a lot of wealth of data. Like, you actually have had a lot of blood tests against Keto Chow with different forms of the base fat, even before this experiment we're about to talk about. And I'm really thankful for you doing that, because yes, those are experiments I would have liked to have done myself. But yeah, there's only so much bandwidth I have. There's only so much bandwidth Siobhan has. And for goodness sakes, it's really been a lot of great data for us to examine that difference between saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The experiment where you really did go so far as to have high PUFA grapeseed oil, was that?
It was grapeseed oil. Yeah.
Was that in your 100-day experiment, or was that?
That was actually a previous one.
That was 4 weeks, right?
Yeah. So, well, I did. Yeah, it was a 42 days of Keto Chow and 6 weeks. I wanted to kind of isolate out the most iconic versions of the fats. So for polyunsaturated fat, I looked at soybean oil, which is really high in polyunsaturated fat, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Grapeseed oil is actually even worse.
So I'll get the worst thing and put it into my body.
Because PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, tend to cause a lowering in LDL cholesterol.
Yes.
And the general consensus, you guys can explain this way better than me, but the general consensus is that having lower LDL is in and of itself beneficial, or at least that's the belief.
Lower risk. Definitely lower risk for cardiovascular.
Yes, lower risk. Yeah. See, you have to use the nice terms, but what is it? The ambassadorial. Anyway.
Yeah.
But that's
wrong theory. Yeah, that's the reason you would want, if you go on a low carb diet and you see this hyper response, we like to call it hyper responders. If you see that hyper response, that that one way you could mitigate this high level of total in LDL cholesterol is that you can bring in more PUFAs, especially polyunsaturated fatty acids. My expectation, I think Siobhan agrees with me on this, is that if saturated fat were here, MUFAs would be here, PUFAs would be like here. Like, PUFAs would have probably a more pronounced effect for the total calories used. Now, the reason for that is actually a list of things, and to what degree each has an effect, we're still trying to parse out. But one of the assays that we have in the experiment we're about to talk about was one I've certainly been very especially interested in for a long time, and it's called an oxidized phospholipid test. So to explain why I'm interested in that test is to explain that the one big item on that list that I've always been curious about is whether or not, if you make these LDL, because it's actually a boat that swims in your bloodstream that your body makes. It's a biological boat to carry lipids so that it can remain soluble. If you make a boat...
I need to do something, Dave.
Good.
Nerd.
Sorry, had to do that. We're going to get into the weeds now, everybody. You've been warned.
Back to the boat.
So if you construct, your body constructs these boats
Yes.
of especially the hull of the boat with phospholipids and cholesterol. Like that's actually how it's made, which incidentally is the same membrane that your cells have, though, you know, with some other differences. But this hull that it makes, part of the process of putting it together is that it's making use of these different fatty acids that you have ingested and that also are resident in your cells, like your adipocytes. They're all kind of pooled together and they're all getting kind of put together and constructed in the places where these boats are constructed, which is in your small intestine and in your liver. And in the process of putting them together, if there's a lot of PUFA, there can be some manufacturing defects, which Siobhan can get into. She found a great paper on that. But one thing that I've always been interested in that I learned about really early on is that the more PUFAs you have on the boats themselves, the more they are susceptible to getting oxidized. And
well, that makes sense because you have double bonds instead of saturated bonds, right?
Right. So what you're referring to is the fatty acids themselves. If they're totally saturated, a saturated fat it's all the carbon bonds. It's hydrogen on each of the ends, so that basically it's like a string, and there's no double bonds. It's single bonded all the way out. A monounsaturated fat, mono 1, means that there's one double bond, and it's almost like a hinge. It can actually move to some degree, and poly means it's 2 or more double bonds. Well, those double bonds are susceptible to getting oxidized effectively. And that's why, by the way, there really is like some cool physics to it. That's why polyunsaturated fats can be liquid at room temperature. It's because they're floppy in the way that they're snaky in the way that
he was going to say kinky.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, but where this comes into play is if you're constructing the boats, you're using a combination of all of these. Granted, there's a little more chemistry to it, and the phosphate heads that are being used and so forth. But at the end of the day, there's some degree of oxidative potential, not even just in the phospholipids, but even in the apolipoproteins that are on the top and so forth. There are certain sites for which they can get oxidized. And the more that the lipoprotein boat gets oxidized, the more likely it is that something known as a scavenger receptor, it's a receptor built to grab things that are modified, like LDL particles that are modified, and take them out of circulation because they're not as helpful, and in fact can even be harmful, depending. You want to take them out of circulation. And that might be the way, or at least part of the way, by which you're lowering LDL, is by basically making boats that are more susceptible to getting oxidized, and therefore you're getting removed out of circulation faster. In other words, I don't know that that's the best way to reduce the LDL in circulation.
Yes. Making defective boats that break down so there's fewer of them.
Yes. But of course, it's all theoretical. The thing I wanted to find out was in doing an experiment where we have PUFAs in particular would probably be the best, but olive oil being a very common one and it being a MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid, I was curious if the oxidized phospholipids would be higher on the MUFA side when compared to, instead of having extra virgin olive oil, having it compared to, say, butter. Yeah. And so I was going to do an experiment using Keto Chow, where I was going to do all Keto Chow with butter for 1 week, flip it over to extra virgin olive oil for 1 week.
Now, why extra virgin and not regular olive oil, or why not avocado oil?
So extra virgin olive oil is probably, I think, within the low carb community considered the best oil. Like if you're going to use an oil that's, a plant-based oil. Well,
even outside of the low carb community, it's the
oil.
Mediterranean oil. I mean, it's like almost everybody agrees that it's fantastic. So.
And if you're inside the low carb community, what's considered the best form of a saturated fat processed fat, it's butter.
butter. Yeah. Butter's
So
best.
we're-
Come on. I mean,
Yeah, so we're kind of putting the two heavyweight champs up against each other, basically, right?
yeah. And whereas avocado oil doesn't have a lot of it doesn't have any of the, is it phytosterols? Dang it.
Yeah, phytosterols. Phyto means
Right.
plant.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that's in extra virgin olive oil, the really dark green stuff that you wouldn't find necessarily in avocado oil or any of the other ones.
And I can't speak too much to that directly, but I believe you're correct. I believe there's more phytosterols in particular.
Yeah.
And Siobhan, maybe you have, do you know that much on the difference between that and avocado oil?
Not really, but for the record, I do not think olive oil is fantastic. I think it's disgusting. Just
I would have to agree with you on that. Avocado oil doesn't have a strong flavor. Extra virgin olive oil,
Yeah,
it's not the best.
My
How about that?
personal feeling is it should have been left to soap making, but then again, I use lard-based soap, so I'm not
Oh.
even on board with that one.
So here's the setup, because I think it's fun for the viewer to know this. This experiment, as I just described, where I was going to start with, I'm just going to shorten it to EVOO. EVOO as
Okay,
an
there you
virgin
go.
olive oil. I was going to do 1 week of EVOO with Keto Chow, keep everything else the same, and then change the base from EVOO to butter for 1 week. And then to make it the experiment even stronger, it's going to be a double crossover, as in I was then going to flip back to EVOO for 1 week and then flip back to butter for 1 week. And for 4 days of the first week when I started this experiment, I was doing okay. And then coming into the 4th day, I really wasn't feeling very good. I suspected it might be an electrolyte issue.
Mhm.
I'm not going to get into the deep details, but I was feeling not good enough to where I'd cancel an experiment, which is very rare. I've had some experiments that have taken me to some far reaches, and I still don't cancel them. So it's very hard for me to cancel an experiment. I then, a few weeks later, retooled it, had a lot more electrolytes on board, attempted it again, failed within 24 hours. And I was really heartbroken about this, Chris. Like, I was like, I've like gained and lost 20 pounds. I've done white bread and processed meat. Kept myself.
Oh my gosh, that was the best. That was your super cholesterol lowering diet, right?
Yeah, it is. It's also a lose all my friends and my wife wanting to kick me out of the house and Siobhan wanting to leave and all of that.
I said, okay, to be clear, I didn't say I would leave you, Dave. I said I would go on vacation if you intended to extend it.
Yeah, but then Chris, you reached out to me. I didn't even ask this of you. You reached out to me. You said, would you like if I went ahead and did the experiment for you? And I to this day, I still cannot. How wonderful is it that there would be somebody who would jump into the breach on this? Because again, I don't think people realize this if they don't do these experiments. Yes, we're geeky. Yes, we love the data, but you really do have to structure your life around these experiments to do them well. I try to eat at roughly the same times each day so that each comparison arm looks the same. I try to be sure that my sleep is synchronized. I try to keep all these things intact. And when you have a life and you have meetings and you have, everything that comes with it.
A wife?
Yeah. Yeah, it changes more things than you probably realize until you actually have to live your life this way, particularly when you have to schedule blood tests and the timing around those blood tests to try to be the same. And I know you were running into that this time around, but to make matters just a little more complicated, whereas normally I go to a LabCorp, which is just, you walk in and hopefully you have it scheduled and so forth.
Yeah.
And I had an extra layer to this, which is Boston Heart. It was great. We had extra tests we were getting from Boston Heart. So we were really getting it from 2 labs, but you had to get these kits. You had to put in the gels overnight to be sure that they were frozen so that they could take the frozen specimens out. Anyway, bottom line is I knew what you were volunteering was a lot, Chris, and I'm so thankful you did it. So.
You actually knew more that I was volunteering before I did, and whatever. We also went on vacation in the middle of it. That stunk.
Wow.
It didn't stink for me.
Yeah. Anyway, That was really hard to do. But well, I wanted to get the data as well, and I'm like, you know what? I did 100 days of just Keto Chow. What's another 4 weeks?
4 weeks.
That's easy. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So-
Let me just say for the record, I've done a 5-week experiment recently, and I'm still psychologically recovering from that. It takes over your entire life and it is incredibly stressful, at least for me. Even I have pretty much no social life, and it's still the lack of control that comes with it is not an easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, someone asked what caused the failure, and that they missed that. My personal theory is it has something to do with the fact that Dave is what we call a lean mass hyperresponder. I am not.
I'm borderline. I'm not really that lean, and I don't quite hit those cut points, but I guess I'm close. I definitely.
You're what we call a borderline.
Yeah, borderline.
We'll just call you borderline. Yeah.
My LDL is typically above 200, but my HDL is probably a little low for it. My triglycerides are close, but I would if I right now worked out like crazy for the next 4 weeks, I'll bet I would get to those numbers. To lean mass hyperresponder. But yes, you're right, and I have wondered about that. I have wondered about sensitivity to certain things, and so I don't know. But you seem to be able to tolerate the. I'm telling you, the grapeseed oil still lingers with me.
Oh yeah.
Of the experiments that I would be willing to do, I don't yet know that I would be willing to do a pure PUFA oil, even for 1 week. I just don't know that I could do it. That's like a bridge far for me.
Before I started, go ahead.
Basically, what you're saying is Chris is the garbage disposal. He's like that dog who will just eat anything perfectly fine.
Just like our 14-year-old son.
There you go. Now, before I started keto, one of the things that I was suffering from was plantar fasciitis. And when I went on a ketogenic diet, that's one of the non-scale victories that I had no idea was going to be coming. And I was really surprised when it came back when I was doing the Keto Chow with grapeseed oil. It came back in a matter of days due to the inflammation.
And then did it take a month to go away?
It took quite a long time.
Yeah.
It was something I was not expecting at all. So yeah, interesting stuff.
Took one for the team, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess so.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was true that on the grapeseed oil with the high PUFA, you did see the most pronounced drop, right? Save the high carb version, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
It's been long enough. That's why I put all this down on my website so that I don't have to remember.
Brad, I'm actually going to your spreadsheet myself because I think I may even have this up. Aha, here we go. Yeah. So yes, your grapeseed PUFA, your LDLP went down to 849.
Okay.
Your LDLP went down to 72. I don't see another 72 or lower up to this point.
So for those of you who don't know what Dave is talking about, on the Keto Chow site, if you go to Keto Chow Science Experiments, I have all the stuff that I've done on here. The most recent one, the one that we're talking about right now, is the extra virgin olive oil versus butter experiment. Gives a bunch of interesting stuff, talks about what I was doing, has a great picture of what I ate for 4 weeks. Yay. Talks about all the blood tests. And there is a link to this spreadsheet right here, which is what Dave is talking about. All of the experiments I've ever done are on this.
Are you sharing for sure?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I would encourage everyone, for real, who likes data to bookmark that right now, because it actually is Chris, you probably underplay just how valuable this data set is. But for anybody who's interested in the very thing that Siobhan and I are interested in, we want this kind of data from not only lots of different people, we want lots of different people, even if they had a few of these. to make this available to all of us in the level of context that we get from what you're sharing there. And with that, we probably should get into the experiment. I know we're having a lot of fun setup. But yeah, oh, sorry, I just saw somebody say in the chat, link please. If you want to describe real quick, Chris.
I can grab the link really quick. Copy link. I like to do stuff while I'm presenting.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyhow.
So I kind of want to do this in maybe 3 phases. So phase 1 is, let's jump to the things that we would be interested in that were specific to this experiment.
Okay.
So the first things first, the oxidation was the one that I was the most interested in. Now you got 2 tests that were associated with it. One was, yes, the one you have right there, OXPL-ApoB. And there's another one, which is OXLDL. You probably didn't make a graph for that one, right?
I did not. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead and go back up to OXPL-ApoB. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up, this assay is one I've been waiting for so long. We just now talked about it a little bit earlier. This is trying to quantify not the boats themselves, the LDL particles themselves, or for that matter, all particles that are ApoB, but the actual oxidized phospholipids, if you were to count them. So an analogy I like to use is if you were to look at a small city and you were to try to count cars on the road by what was damaged and what wasn't, and you had a threshold of if it's scratched all the way to if it's totaled, then it was just a pass or fail. Like a car is damaged if it has a scratch, a car is damaged if it's totaled. Well, you wouldn't have a lot of good information to go on unless you could count on more cars being totaled equaling a bigger problem with the traffic, and that roughly the same amount of cars are scratched, and that the car total remains the same. But if you look at a small town and then you go to a big town and you're still counting damaged cars, you're going to be like, oh, now wait a second. There's a lot more cars with scratches. Therefore, there are a lot more cars that are damaged. Therefore, there's traffic accidents everywhere. So you see the problem with this pass-fail issue. What I'm interested in is something that's actually going to count the damage itself. No, I really want to quantify the amount of damage per car. And in the case of oxidized phospholipids, that's like actually counting the damage on the ApoB. So OXPL-ApoB is the oxidized phospholipids found on ApoB containing lipoproteins specifically. And because of that, we can get a sense of what the oxidization level is in the aggregate in the bloodstream. So sorry, I know that was a bit geeky, but hopefully a lot of people were able to follow along. So your control, that very first data point that's at 1.4, that was what your diet that was uncontrolled coming up to the beginning of this experiment, that was your baseline test.
Yeah, which is like mostly carnivore with 1 or 2 keto chows a day.
And there's something I suspect, just like Siobhan and I and many other people who do these very lengthy experiments, you might have even been indulging a little bit coming up to that.
No, never. No. I wouldn't have eaten a half container of Rebel ice cream.
Half? What are you talking about? Half, please.
Well, Miriam always makes me split it with her.
That's right. Then I won't eat the whole thing.
So yes, the reason I mentioned that is I believe you could, if you're metabolically healthy generally, you could tank your LDLP, your LDL particle count, and correspondingly drop your OXPL to some extent by over-consuming. So it's going to track to some degree with your LDL particle count, but to a much smaller degree relative to how much you actually are undergoing oxidative stress. Does that make sense? So this is why I like OXPL ApoB is I believe that oxidative stress will count more toward this metric than anything else. Now, where this gets interesting is EVOO, the second data point, that's the extra virgin olive oil. That's your first week. So first week on EVOO, we see the ox phospholipid climb.
And this test, just to clarify, is after I had been eating just Keto Chow with extra virgin olive oil for 7 days.
Correct.
So this is the blood test following that.
Yep. So then on the butter arm, the week following, it went back down to 2. I believe it's nanomoles per liter. I believe is their
Nanograms, I think.
Nanograms per liter. Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
And then it went back up on the second arm with EVOO. Now, I was speculating, but I was wrong, that it might go back down again on the very last data point, that it might go back down again on the butter arm, but that's not what happened. It went up slightly coming into the butter arm. In which case, I would have to say pretty inconclusive. It would have been fun if this had just continued going, like if you just done this for like 2 more sets. Yeah. But that said, this was one of the metrics I was most interested in, and I wouldn't say that it gave me a lot of confidence just yet that I can know for sure which direction it was going to go. That very last data point throws it off a little bit.
That's what data does.
That's what data does. And you know what? We got to be faithful to the data. Whatever the data says is where we go with it.
Oh, I thought we redo the hypothesis to fix the narrative that was presented.
Yes,
Dang
that's
it. I'm sorry. Wrong sort of research. Anyway,
but
sorry.
I see you have next queued up, because this would be our next one of interest, is LDLP, EVOO versus butter. This tracks pretty close to my expectations. Really almost dead on with my expectations. So your baseline, especially if you were indulgent, was relatively low for you, I think, right? At 1280. I don't know what your normal LDLP typically is.
Let's see.
LDLP, yeah.
It kind of goes around.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, if we look at my 100 days of Keto Chow, interestingly enough, this is when I did the 100 days of Keto Chow, I suckered someone else into doing the experiment with me.
I don't know how to on that.
Yeah, I don't know. She had like really, really consistent data compared to me. But anyway, as far as her small LDLP, but yeah, so I go between, well, here it is, up and down and up and down. And then here's hers, just for reference.
So
scroll back a little bit, because I do want Siobhan to see that one part where it's, see where Siobhan, it says sick.
Oh yeah, avocado oil sick.
And stick.
Oh, interesting.
And notice on the week following, his small LDLP climbs to a new height.
To make him better.
I also had avocado oil with MCT that week.
Virtually everybody I know who tries to have MCT in a large quantity has a horrible experience with it.
Well, yes, that's true.
Okay, so flip back to the prior one. So getting back to the LDLP, again, this is the beauty of a double crossover. You can kind of watch the pattern in real time.
Yeah.
So your LDLP in the EVOO is smaller. It's less than what it is versus the butter. You see that in the butter arms, it's relatively higher. However, it also seems to even out a little bit more toward the end. So for example, the EVOO first data point is still a little bit higher than the butter last data point. So 1336 versus 1307. I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So so yeah, you also have the lipids, and I like how you have them grouped down there. If you want to
there we go
down further. So this is the LDL-C followed pretty close to what our expectation would be. So indeed, this follows the advice. If you wanted to replace more butter with extra virgin olive oil, you probably would see a relatively lower amount of LDL. But I was likewise to see what would be happening with HDLC in the same regard. And it's not too much of a shift, but HDL does tend to track with LDL in this context, and that kind of goes a little bit lower when LDL goes lower. It goes a little bit higher when it goes higher, but it's a little less consistent. And now there's another one I don't think if I told you to go make a graph on.
What was that?
But it was your HDL map. I found that one to be interesting, and I'm not sure.
Do I have HDL map?
You do have it in the Boston Heart data.
Oh, okay.
So
Way down.
That's actually what I was just wondering about. I wonder what the HDL map is.
So the A1, A2, A3,
Yes.
A4. Let me explain real quick to people what that is. Here's the way I like to describe it now to lay people. The job. Oh, you're going somewhere else now.
No, I'm going to pull up one of the Boston Heart things and show
yes.
them this.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. So over to the right, you see the Boston Heart HDL map, and you can see the little HDL particle graphic. You see how the alpha 1, that's A-1, how that's big, and it gets smaller and smaller down to the pre-beta 1. That's the. It looks almost like a cookie, right? Or a clam or something like that.
Second to bottom one, I think, looks like a spaceship.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the way I like to describe this now. I like to say, look, the job of an ApoB lipoprotein, that boat, its job is to start off big, full of cargo. And generally its job is to release that cargo out into the periphery and get smaller until it graduates, is the term I like to use, where it can then be taken up. Whereas the job of ApoA1, as we're seeing here, the HDL, its job is to start small, and it's to accept a lot of lipids and get larger until it graduates to where it can be taken up. Now, that's a bit of a simplification because there are other elements that are involved, but in mass, in the aggregate, I would say that's generally the story you'll see, particularly as it regards metabolism. And it's a big part of the paper that we're going to be putting forward eventually. So if you see the alpha 3 and the alpha 4, and you see what optimal is, it shows that what you're wanting is a small number of them. You're wanting under 20 for alpha 3 and under 20 for alpha 4. When you get a snapshot of your blood, you don't want to see a bunch of them in there. The more of them there is, the more it associates with more heart disease. But with alpha 1 and alpha 2, it's the other way around. You want to see a lot of the bigger ones. You want to see the ones that are close to graduation, because that to me suggests it's being successful at what it's doing. Again, a bit of a simplification. I know Siobhan's probably rolling her eyes right now because there is other context, such as illness, for which there may be other things to consider. But if you're healthy metabolism, and this is primarily being used for what it typically is used for, which is this constant flux of these lipids in your vascular system, then that's kind of the story. And that's kind of why you see this association being so relevant. So now that I've told you that, go back to the spreadsheet. And what we find is that in the alpha 1, look at that top line with the alpha 1. In the control.
Can you highlight it?
Yeah, you can highlight it.
So people can see.
In the control, it was 28.1. And then in the EVOO arm, it was 28.7. In the butter, it jumped up to 39, which is a fairly substantial jump. It's about a 33% jump. It drops back down a little bit in the EVOO arm, and then it jumps up just a tiny bit in the butter arm.
This is something I'm finding interesting is the last two arms seem to be coming up more flatlining compared to the first ones. I'm wondering why that is.
Well, and that's something I wanted to talk about with you as well, Siobhan, is I have been, here's the one thing that we can't easily talk about, which is flux with adipocytes. So one misconception is that the lipids that are placed in your adipocytes are your fat cells, that it's placed in and it's just kind of like all mixed together. And when you pull something out, it's almost like pulling out, like the lottery where you're pulling a ball out of a bowl. It's not actually true. A lot of what's the last in is the first out. So the one thing we couldn't ever really know, but that this is giving us maybe some clues on, is how much you could front load things from your EVOO experiment that might have a part to play in the butter arm and then back again. And I feel like that's kind of what the last two arms were showing, especially when I was looking over the data today, was that perhaps they are having less of a distinction from each other because now they're sharing more of the lipids overall. And the neat thing is we can kind of see that play out because of the fatty acid balance test, which we also got with Boston Heart. This, by the way, boys and girls, is why it's so great to get wide spectrum blood tests so that you can look at all of these things together. It's so powerful to be able to do that. So yeah, if you want to.
I made a graph.
Oh, you did? Okay.
There you go. With the alphas. Sorry.
Oh, no. Okay. You did that just now. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So which one do you want to do? The lipid balance, right?
Yeah. Let me see.
Fatty
acid balance is what it is.
Yeah.
I myself am actually pulling it up as we're doing this. And this is another great example, because what you would think, if the diet was authoritative in its control, then the saturated fatty acid index, for example, that's the first in the Boston Heart fatty acid balance, would be very distinctive in its up and down. And it is. If you look at saturated fatty acid index, then it seems to be very AB. It seems to bounce in and out.
Yeah. Tracks pretty well.
Yeah. Now, where it gets interesting is where you start to look at the omega-3s, like the EPA, DHA, ALA.
Because they keep going up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. That EPA really went up. Oh,
yeah.
And look at the DHA.
Yeah.
116. What the?
Okay.
So what I'm seeing from my perspective is we are at a minimum starting to offset the balance, because they're not in a balanced way shuttling between the arms, distinctively creating the character of one versus the other, coming into the following arm and then the following arm after that. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if it's hard to articulate what I'm trying to say, but the pool is not being discretely replaced with another pool.
Okay.
We now actually have some mudding of the waters, if you will, from what the last introduction brought about. So the balance itself could, in fact, have these downstream impacts. And that would be very interesting. I'm still kind of parsing that out of my mind, just exactly what that can mean. I also looked to linoleic acid because that was of special interest. You actually started with a lot more at base. And then it kind of drops at first, going to its nadir in the first of the butter arms, and then starts climbing and gets all the way back up to 859 later. Now, I don't know how much of this just has, error rate baked in, But
Okay.
that
Yeah.
said, when I see something like that where it looks like a curve, I get a little more interested in it, and it starts haunting me. I start thinking about it a lot more because you see,
Yeah, I'm curious about that one as well. I kind of want to start adding like all this to like every single test I get just to see what the error rate is and what it does just normally.
It's
Well,
a good
and
thing that those tests are cheap.
Oh yeah.
yeah. Well, and Siobhan, I want you to look at arachidonic acid, the one right under it, and you can see it's a precipitous drop, full stop, all the way there.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
It is interesting, and this is where we do the big drop, the big shoe drop, which is your fasting insulin, which I think is one of the most fascinating things from this experiment.
And
So
I did actually graph that one. Let's
yes,
see. Because I remember you going, what the heck?
yeah. Look at this baby. All right, so in your control, oh, you don't have it labeled. I can't see the first. There we go. In your control,
11.
your incoming, your fasting insulin was 11. And then in your first arm of EVOO, it drops to 6. Then it climbs back up to 10.9 on the butter, drops again to 5.9 on EVOO, comes up to 9.1 on butter. Now, no question, if you came to me and I knew nothing at all about your diet, you said, hey, I've been on a low carb, high fat diet, and my last fasting insulin was 5.9. And then I made this change.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you what the change is, but now my fasting insulin is 10 or 11. I would go, well, I don't know how much I like that change you just made. I would consider a fasting insulin of 10 or 11 to be concerning.
Yes.
And when I saw that, I was like, this makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, is this just confirmation bias? Because all I know is that I consume a huge amount of saturated fat, for that matter, a lot of butter. And I don't see insulin levels like that unless I'm very hypercaloric, unless I'm like just consuming a lot, and that then there's other factors involved. And then it occurred to me, oh, wait a sec. Chris had prior butter data. You had from your prior, what was it? This was the 100.
That was the 100 days. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had 2, and that's now reflected at the end of this graph, your butter 4/05 and butter 4/12. And this was from last year, right?
This was, 2019, April of 2019.
So about a year and a half ago, both of these tests were lower than all of the tests from this last experiment. 2.8 and 4.9.
Where's the I know it's around here somewhere.
Fasting insulin,
I can't see it.
Another thing
There
I
it is.
think is worth mentioning
right here. Yeah, middle
is often when people are discussing insulin, they mention how it fluctuates. And both Dave and I have gotten a lot of insulin and C-peptide tests. And sure, there's some fluctuation that can happen, like the 2.8 to the 4 point whatever. That's more what I would expect from just normal fluctuation. But the 6 to 10 to 6 to 10 is not what I would expect to see, just personally.
Yeah.
Right. And looking, just glancing right now at all of your other tests.
The only one that's ever gotten lower than that was when I was doing grapeseed oil.
Grapeseed. Look at that, Siobhan.
2.4. LabCorp actually flagged it as being low and of concern. I was like, oh, okay.
Now that is pretty fascinating, and I think it does introduce the consideration that perhaps there is a unique way in which MUFAs or PUFAs might bring fasting insulin lower if you were in a metabolic context for which your insulin would be higher at normal levels, which is kind of suggested by by your control, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, let's say that you're eating how you normally are for, say, the next week or 2 weeks, and then you take a fasting insulin, and again, it pops up at 10 or 11. that would seem suggestive that maybe for whatever reason, something you're consuming or something with your lifestyle is resulting in higher fasting insulin, which I would be curious. I mean, again, that is something that I would consider to be worth investigating further or seeing if you could take action to do something about. But that said, this was of such a distinctive oddity to me because of its magnitude that I was inclined to think that there might be something with the Kirkland brand butter specifically. And as I suggested to you earlier, and as we kind of have as a tentative plan right now, is you, myself, and Miriam, you're considering jumping in the fold on this? Is that right?
I'll do it. 6 days, nothing.
Yeah, we're thinking of doing a 6-day experiment, which will go as follows. We basically try to emulate everything Chris was doing for 3 days, but with Kerrygold butter, which I'm sorry, I do think is the superior butter, but then I'm a butter snob, so I'll admit that. But do that for 3 days, get a blood test, and then do the Kirkland butter for 3 days, and then get a blood test.
Yeah.
And from that, I think we cover a lot of bases. For one, if it really was something about Kirkland butter, better to do the Kerrygold butter first, get the test, and if the test comes back where the insulin is low, and then we do the Kirkland butter, and then it goes higher, that'll be very strong evidence that that could have been an issue. And I like it in that order because if we do the Kirkland butter first, but the insulin is still high, it could have been residual from the diet before then. So I think that might be the best way to arrange it. And I'm willing to jump in the fold with you. We almost started it today, but the problem was I couldn't get the supplies of what you were consuming before. So I need to get that, and then when I get that, I'm going to try to emulate everything you're doing, and then you guys will be doing the same thing on your end. And we're going to start December 1st. Was what we were thinking.
Yeah, it's the Tuesday right
after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Mike.
2
Mike,
weeks.
do you have a Costco account? Let us
it.
know, okay, Mike?
Do it.
Dave needs to get some Costco stuff.
Yeah.
He lives in Vegas.
Yeah, he does. Anyway, sorry.
So yeah, 2 weeks from today, we're gonna see if we're penciling it in. I have to. A caveat is I'm up to my eyeballs right now with this IRB and getting the study going. And oh my God, it's so much more work than I thought it was gonna be. But whatever. That does take priority over anything else, including the experiments, which I have way more fun doing than that.
Now, hold on. What's an IRB, Dave?
So basically, it's a there's a study
institutional review board
for lean mass hyperresponders, and it's effectively a study design you submit to a committee. The committee confirms that it's ethical and appropriate, et cetera. And you need to get that approval in order for it to be a true clinical trial. And then once we get the bona fides for that, then we can actually get started on it and start recruiting people for it. And I have contended for years now that this may be one of the most important things we could do right now, because all this talk about cholesterol being high on low carbers being a good thing or a bad thing will help to answer that right now, because we're going to be looking at the very population that has the highest, most pronounced levels of LDL and total cholesterol with otherwise excellent cardiometabolic markers. So if the lipid hypothesis, the hypothesis that high total in LDL is independently atherogenic, it will by itself create plaque in your arteries, these are the people to test it. And we want to know.
Yeah.
So it's
this is something that we actually didn't get into, but that's as part of the Citizen Science Foundation, correct?
Yes. In fact, the Citizen Science Foundation was basically created originally for this study. If you donate any money to us right now, it goes straight to that study. We do have plans for after this study is truly launched and we've got everything going that we'd like to expand on the purview of what the Citizen Science Foundation will be doing. It's fun. That's what I'm talking about. We dream of the day where we have a lab and that we
have many discussions on this. And as a side note, all the proceeds from Own Your Labs also go to the Citizen Science Foundation.
Right. That's right. If you get your blood work through Own Your Labs, you should know Siobhan and I don't take a penny of it. We send it all in the direction of the CSF, and it's helping citizen science. You know,
Did you guys get 501c3 yet?
Yep,
we are. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So
does that mean I get a thing that says that I donated and it's tax deductible? Yeah, sweet.
Just talk to your tax preparer. If you're coming to the end of the year and you're trying to, fill in some of that donation capability, believe me, we could use the help. So that's for sure. Nice. But yeah, I'm excited. We're in critical stages, and so that was my only caveat. Was the only thing that might interrupt me being able to jump on board for that experiment is if it turns out that I have admin work associated with it that I think will throw me off.
Yes.
So
well, and you also have to get approval from Mrs. Cholesterol.
I've already got that. So long as it didn't interfere with Thanksgiving, I'm good.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Well, and one of the people who's watching Caden, when I was doing the experiment, he was kind of trying it out on his himself. He actually talked about his own IRB, which was his wife. Finally told him to stop because he was doing avocado oil, and it caused his blood pressure to go down precipitously. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So by the way, Mike Mollett does have a Costco card, and he lives in North Vegas. So he can get you hooked up.
Yeah, I have a membership. I don't have Costco, so that's the one catch. If anybody wants to with me at Costco, I'll buy you a nice low carb lunch. Actually, I don't care if it's low carb. You can have whatever kind of lunch, so that's fine.
Grab one of the rotisserie chickens; they're pretty good.
Yeah,
just true. Eat the whole thing.
Which reminds me of something. One of the things that you were concerned about, Dave, as far as because we talked about this a little bit earlier today, with the Kirkland butter, was you were concerned that maybe it had something like natural flavors or something like that in the Kirkland butter that would be a potential confounder. And I sent you a picture, and it just has cream, salt. That was it.
Well, what you're referring to is I looked it up, and there were some label pictures where I guess a prior version of it had natural flavorings in it. And I'm always suspicious when I see natural flavorings on any label for anything. But there's another thing that leads me to believe that that's less likely to be true, at least in the way that the higher insulin could be related to like carb creep, which is you wore a CGM throughout the experiment, right?
I did indeed wear a CGM.
And so I would have expected, again, the reason this really stands out, guys, is because of how high it is. It would be one thing if it was like undetectably higher glucose area under the curve that brought it from, a 6 to a 7 or 8. No, getting it up to like around 11.
That is really high. And I hadn't seen mine that high in a long time.
You're right. And that hits my radar. I want to know why that happened. And sure, I could believe that it was butter if that was the only data we had. But I myself have done so many experiments where I had a lot of butter in the experiment. It didn't spike my glucose. It didn't seem to have an insulinemic effect. But that's all the more reason why I'd like to just test it directly. And if it is batch specific, like if there's something wrong with the batch that you have, that would be
with butter.
Yeah, that would be a little bit hard to detect if you already used it up and like maybe it got better. But I couldn't help but think, just spitballing. I couldn't help but think. I wonder if COVID brought around maybe some less favorable manufacturing processes or something that could have allowed for more cutting, or I don't know.
COVID ruined everything. Sorry.
Yeah.
Allow me to put on my slightly larger glasses.
And this is definitely relevant to me because currently I eat like 4 to 5 tablespoons of butter a day. So it's a pretty significant portion of my diet. And if I have to like start being suspicious about butter, like that's not a thing I wanted to have to worry about.
Yeah.
Right. So
Well, and we also talked about this a bit earlier, but during this experiment, I was only doing chocolate keto chow for every single one of my meals, which does have a slightly higher carb count. Not a lot, but it was about 3 more net carbs per day.
that's
than I was in the previous one.
That's not going to put you at 11 fast.
No, it isn't going to put 11.
And again, you can't. This is the beauty of doing the chocolate through all of the arms. It doesn't explain why that wouldn't have happened in the PUFA arm.
Yeah.
So why did it go down in the PUFA arm? It went up in the butter arm. I want to know. I'm very curious.
Yeah. That's a really good question. So here we go. December. Let's do it.
Yeah, for sure.
So is there anything else that you guys want to talk about? So we already talked about Citizen Science Foundation, Own Your Labs. Anything else? I mean, seriously, this is the first time we've ever had you on the live stream, Dave. We've actually had Siobhan on before.
Have you? I don't remember.
Yeah, you were sitting on our sofa just before Keto Salt Lake.
Right.
Oh, you're right. Now I remember.
It's like you wanted to crash on our sofa, and you're like, well, why don't we do a live stream? Because you're here.
Okay, let's do
It's
it.
the best way to get me for anything. Just let me sleep on your couch.
That's right.
I have one thing. Watch Queen's Gambit. There you go.
Yay! Yes.
That's got the lady from Emma, right?
Is that a TV show?
It's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's a TV show. It's about
I
chess.
don't watch TV except The Mandalorian.
She has these abnormally large eyes, though.
Kinda, yeah.
Dave,
Yeah.
what about you?
Well, actually, I had already even tweeted out. I try to keep my Twitter mainly about lipids and science and so forth, but occasionally I'll make a pop culture-ish reference. But that was one of my tweets. It's like, I just have to say, as an aside, Queen's Gambit is some of the best TV I've ever seen. Or I should say at least the best TV I've seen in years. And I think it's because every once in a while a show just hits all the notes. It has great acting, great directing, great writing, but also gorgeous cinematography, gorgeous costume and production design, and really just an original, like a very original construct of the story.
Okay.
It's kind of a, it's a fictionalized history of sorts, but it's one that feels very compelling. It's a great hero's journey. One thing I kind of complain about is I feel like there's not enough layered, complex female narratives that I feel like a lot of times when they're putting together a show that has like a main female lead, it doesn't succeed. They don't put as much work into I know this is going to sound bad, but the suffering that you normally associate with the hero's journey that we typically get with very complex characters. But I feel like that's changed. I feel like there's more and more dramas that have strong female protagonists that are not one-dimensionally strong. Their strength is earned, and it comes through. And I feel like Queen's Gambit's such an excellent example of that. It's just it's one that will put you through the ringer as a viewer who's connected to her. So
I can't watch it because then I'll cry. That's what you're saying.
yeah, it could happen.
I mostly kind of hated her, but in like a good way.
Yeah.
Okay.
You hate her because she's amazing? Is that it? Because I could hate people like that too. I could see that.
Well, I'm going to put on my slightly smaller
What are you
glasses.
doing?
Watch it.
I can see why you didn't want to use the word plan.
I suppose
IT
another
crowd
side
reference.
note, also a good recommend, IT crowd. Also, as another side note, I started a knitting podcast recently. I really talked about it because, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not linking it. You have to try and find it.
How do you do a knitting podcast?
You talk about all the cool new stitches and
you hold up
patterns.
the stuff you're working on and the yarn you've bought, and you talk about all the horrible mistakes you made on a project and how you had to rip back multiple rows with hundreds of
I thought you
pages.
said podcast, so I thought you meant audio only.
Well,
and then
video
like,
cast, technically.
click, click.
YouTube channel. Okay, anything lipid related you guys want to talk about?
I will push my low-carb Houston presentation on lipoprotein(a) in case anyone wants to look into it, because
Okay, but you have to say that slowly enough because
the rest of the world need to understand what you're saying.
Go to
lipoprotein,
cholesterolcode.com/LPA and then hit enter.
Hold on a second.
Yes.
You got this.
Because this is something I get asked about pretty frequently, and now I can just direct them there.
We're
And
on
not just
cholesterolcode.com.
I get asked about it frequently. Let me just say this.
LPLA.
No, just LPA.
Mm.
No second
Fine.
L.
Fine.
So I'll just say this.
Question mark.
No question mark.
Oh my gosh.
Just /LPA.
I believe in you.
Dang it. I put a bracket in there.
I put the link in the chat, or I tried. I might not be
already-
allowed, but
She already did it.
Okay.
So
In the private chat over
I have
there.
to say, this is easily one of the most brilliant things from an already brilliant person. Siobhan just kills it in this presentation. And it was pure torture to know that she had it up and we couldn't link it because it wasn't public for like a year. So
yeah.
every
Like,
time somebody
literally a
asked
year.
me about LP(a), I was like, well, there's this great presentation that you can't yet see that will be available eventually. And now it's finally here. And if you ever wanted to know anything about LP(a), this hits. And what I have to love a lot about this is I think Siobhan strikes the perfect balance of giving you a lot of content and a lot of knowledge about it, but she explains it in a very effective way, using a lot of good analogies and just keeping it very layperson friendly. It's absolutely a triumph of a presentation. So yes,
We
just
were
watch.
there.
It's
Yeah,
great.
we were. Okay. Parahead Renee has a question. If there's someone who's wanting to know more about their own numbers and everything like that, is there an affordable way to monitor this at home? I think she asked earlier if there was like a glucose monitor that you could use, kind of like, but to check your lipids. And there is the cardio check, which is crazy expensive. Right.
You know, to be fair, I want to say the Cardio Check Plus, which is the one I use, I think it retails at like $550, but there's the more affordable one, which I think is like $250 or $300, which I grant.
Three of them. Come on.
Yeah, a lot of people might feel is expensive. Actually, the most expensive part of it are the strips themselves. The strips they can be like $10 or something along those lines. There's just no getting around it. It's not a cheap thing to ascertain because you are really measuring lipoproteins and the contents in the lipoproteins. So there's not yet. I mean, certainly if I had billions of dollars, I'd love to try to come up with the keto mojo for lipids, but we're not there yet. So
I want a CGM for lipids. That's what I
oh
want.
my God. Oh, I would love that. That would be great.
Yeah, my veins right here want one of those too. But how much does it cost, for instance, to get a comprehensive metabolic or a
lipid panel, standard lipid panel.
How much does it cost to own your labs?
At Own Your Labs, it's like, if you just got that, it'd probably be like $10 or $11, something like that.
Oh, that's not that bad.
Now there's also the venipuncture fee.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's included in what I figured. And the good news is we recently found a new system for how to do fees at checkout. So it used to be like a flat $23.30 fee, and now it should be a lot less, especially for the smaller orders. So that's good.
Nice. Caboodleberry wants a continuous lipid monitor.
Yeah.
A CL.
Same.
We all do.
There you go. What about a continuous ketone monitor? That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Or a
That would be
continuous insulin monitor. I'd actually like that.
I want a continuous everything monitor, and then I'll just have like all these different things all over me.
Okay.
More robot than human.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to get your lipids checked, yeah, you can go to Own Your Labs, and it's through LabCorp, right?
Yeah, it's through LabCorp.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I will
We
say
do,
this.
we do
are
recommend comparison shopping. Just
correct.
putting
That's
that out
true.
there.
I will say this: we are testing. We're not there yet, but we are testing and may eventually have a partner with Boston Heart. But that's
Oh, really?
that's in the testing stages. We don't offer it yet. And
Yeah.
to capitalize on what Siobhan said, we're at the end of the day, we didn't start Own Your Labs to make $1 zillion and try to talk you out of better choices. On the contrary, we want everyone to find whatever the best lab partner is, which is why even on our homepage, we list competitors that we recommend that you could comparison shop with, because you know whatever works the best for people. We just want them to get the data. One of our chief complaints is that people should be able to take more ownership of their health, and in doing so, get more of their data, get more of their own blood work, try to get and better understand what it means and how to better, understand their own health. And I honestly, one of the most frustrating things that people will bring to the group sometimes is when they say, my doctor told me my cholesterol is too high. And that's all they were told. They weren't given any numbers. They weren't given any data or anything. And sometimes that comes with the recommendation of something they should do. Now, such as going on medication. Here's the thing. We don't push back on doctors' advice. We do want people to work with their doctors. At the same time, I do encourage people to be informed. I do want people to understand for themselves what they're deciding on and what they're, particularly if it's a lifelong choice, to feel like they have some agency with it.
Yeah. Well,
and
you have to have a conversation with your doctor, not just sit there, shut up, and do what they say.
Yeah, and two things on my part. One part is with my previous doctor back in Indiana before I moved, I had taken my cholesterol drop protocol results and took it to him. And it wasn't like, oh, look at how low my cholesterol is now. It's like, look at this change over time. Now let's talk about why this is. So I used it as an icebreaker. And then the other thing is, if people have a doctor that they're not happy with, they're maybe looking for a new one, they want someone who's familiar with low carb, Diet Doctor has a really excellent list of low carb doctors in the US, across the world, including people who do remote consults in case there's not one near you. So that's a good place to look. Yeah, I asked Andreas to add the remote consult thing and he did. So I'm happy about that.
You move mountains.
Well, he is a bit of a mountain, isn't he? Well, that's fantastic. Okay, anything else you guys wanted to talk about?
I'm tapped out.
You're tapped out? What about you, Dave? You never seem to want to be quiet about stuff.
It's been a heck of a week, and it's only Tuesday. We have a meeting in the morning on the IRB, as it happens to be. But yeah, that's a lot of where my headspace is, and it's exhausting. I'll concede. When you and I first met, Chris, I kind of miss those days in that I just had all kinds of bandwidth to just do experiments. And
Miriam always bristles when she used to say, when I used to talk about bandwidth, she used to be like, that is such a dumb term.
It's a perfect term.
It's a valid term. Bandwidth. How wide do you have to push stuff through? When you talk about how many projects you can do, it's your bandwidth. And yeah, it's a weird term, but anyway, so yeah, you want to go back to the days when
well, I miss them. Don't get me wrong. The work that we're doing right now, it's very fulfilling in many respects. But at the same time, and I know this as a business owner, it's good when business grows and you have more responsibilities and you have more things that you're making happen for other people. At the same time, it's the nature of the beast. It also means that you become more important in ways that entrench you into administrative tasks, paperwork, all kinds of hassles that you only get at that scale, that make you sometimes be nostalgic for the days when you didn't have to deal with it, right?
Remember the old days when I had really good health insurance that somebody else was paying for?
And when you left work and you didn't think about work anymore,
I could take a vacation.
The day was over.
Yeah, exactly. I I'll concede though, it is one thing I don't miss that you're in the thick of now, which is because I don't talk a lot to people about my former, having owned a business and then selling it and so forth. I don't miss having a payroll. Payroll was always kind of a hassle, and everything with, insurance and healthcare and all the different aspects that sucked up a lot of bandwidth. Getting back to bandwidth. So I think a good
bandwidth, Dave.
Yeah, I think a good measurement of bandwidth is this.
Okay.
If you have to disappear for 3 days, how bad does it hurt coming back?
More than 3 days for sure.
Because if I don't answer any email or any messages, like if I'm just entirely out of pocket, weekends are not too bad, but still, if I'm entirely out of pocket for 3-4 days, I just have a very brutal return. My email box is just overstuffed to a point where it feels like just unmanageable. And there's so many other things I got to take care of.
That's what I call
Can you imagine if you went on a world, around the world trip, videoing a bunch of interviews with people?
I can't imagine that. Yeah.
What would that be like?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd get back, and then like this pandemic thing would happen. Everybody would have to, isolate themselves, and yet you still wouldn't have time to edit it, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, and I'll tell you the best part of all
That's
that.
mean.
Well, part of the problem is I never got a chance to, because the U.S. tour never got to happen. So,
is that it?
Oh.
no. So for anybody who doesn't know the inside joke Chris is playing off of here, we quite literally, Sharon and I, we literally circled the globe, caught a huge number of interviews, 36 interviews.
That's a ton.
Yeah. And in 28 cities in 17 countries. So we got a huge amount of footage. And I was then that was over January, February. And the plan was over March, April was going to be the US tour, if you will. It was going to be in Texas, California, New York, parts of Canada. And then we would have been rounded out. And from that, we were going to cut together a cholesterol code documentary. And I was super happy with the world tour. But here's the catch. The catch is a freaking pandemic was unfolding as we were doing it.
Oh, it was crashing down as you were going from city to city.
Yeah, it was almost like an action movie, because it was like it was chasing us, because we started in China. Our first continent that we landed in was China, in Shanghai. And we went to Macau, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong. These were the first places we went to. And this was at the beginning of January. And at that time, I heard about this Wuhan virus, and I kept checking in on it. And I was like, well, I don't know if this is really a big deal. It seems like it's being made out to be a big deal, but I don't know. 2 weeks later, we're trying to board a ship to tour New Zealand. So Sharon, in her genius, figured out how we could hit 5 cities in New Zealand, and that was just to get on a cruise ship, because that handles the lodging and the travel. So the cruise ship would stop at those different places. And I was like, oh, that's great. Okay, we'll do that. Well, we're about to board that cruise ship exactly 2 weeks after we had left China. And at that moment in time was where they started getting serious about doing something about this virus. So people coming on the cruise ship who had come from China, they were keeping from getting on the ship. So we were right there at the edge. We were right there at the 2-week quarantine period. And ultimately they let us on board. But I had to do some barking, and I was very uncharacteristic for me. But it worked. We got on, and then, I got to get more interviews, including George Henderson.
Oh, really?
Jealous.
Yeah.
So jealous.
Did you get Gary Fettke by chance?
Who?
Gary Fettke?
Don't who Gary Fettke?
No, I just didn't hear him at first. Gary Fettke was in Tasmania. I wasn't able to get him. I was able to get Melbourne interviews and Sydney interviews. And almost got Perth interviews, but nobody was able to make themselves available at Perth. But yeah, we also went to Dubai and
wow.
also got a bunch of interviews in UK. Probably the biggest score was we quite literally went to Lund, Sweden to connect with Yufi Ravenskov. That was a big get. You may not know who he is, but
No, I don't.
if you know cholesterol and if you know cholesterol skepticism, you'd know who he is.
Okay.
From what I recall, he actually commented on Cholesterol Code and say, "Hey, if you're going to be, near where I am, you should come and talk to me." It's like, and I immediately took it and was like, "Dave."
Yeah. Many in the low carb skeptic world kind of consider him the original skeptic, because
Now, when you talk about low carb skeptic, you mean people who are skeptic of low carb diets and lifestyles?
no, I mean, I should have said cholesterol. Anybody who's a cholesterol skeptic.
Okay.
I see.
He's written many meta-analyses. He's probably the most published cholesterol skeptic, is my guess,
Okay.
of anybody out there. And
So this is people who do not subscribe to a belief in the diet heart hypothesis.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the disposition of this project at this point?
Well, this is the issue. The issue was when I came back, because then COVID kicked in, I couldn't complete the US and part of Canada tour. And as Siobhan knows, while I could have cut together a documentary with what I already had, I only had one pro-lipid hypothesis person, one person who did subscribe to the diet heart hypothesis. So unfortunately, that documentary would have just been entirely pro-skeptic, because I already got a whole bunch of skeptics.
So in other words, par for the course for documentaries, as opposed to something that actually explores the topic and really gets into the meat.
I want both sides to be represented. It may not be represented in equal amounts.
Yeah.
But I genuinely do want the strong case for the pro-lipid hypothesis made in this film. I want to feel like I'm exposing the viewer to both sides as best as they can present them. And if I only had just the one lipid expert presenting that side, I feel like I would have been just not meeting the goal that I had. So I'm sitting on the footage. I hope at some point that I can get back to traveling and then connect with these other people, or maybe they can meet me here. But for the time being, I just don't want to put it out. There is one other possibility, which is that I just release these interviews as individual videos, because they are gorgeous. I mean, we shot them all on log and we got good sound. I love them. But that said, I don't know. I kind of want to hold on just a little bit longer. It could be these interviews end up being, it could be that the serendipitous end to the story is that I'll have all of that footage. We'll be getting to the end of the study at around the same time I will have caught those other interviews, and then it can all be part of the same documentary. And that could also be pretty cool if it works out that way.
I guess considering the quality of the footage you've gotten, you don't want to do webcam interviews for the remainder.
No, and people bring that up. They're like, "Well, just finish the rest out on a Zoom," and I'm like, "Look, I did not put in that much effort." I mean,
in the words of Peter Ballerstedt, what a month we've had this week.
Yeah.
You can always just mail someone cameras and say, "Here, set this up," and
talk to me.
No, if there's anything that I learned, it's that there really is value in going to people where they're at. So if you go to them, to their home, to their office, to their stomping ground, you get a really good interview. You really get them at their most comfortable, at their best paced. They feel like you're a guest to them, and they don't feel on their back foot. And it made me respect why it's probably better to just put in the extra effort to travel to them than to try to capture all the interviews at a conference. Granted, there were a number of interviews I was planning to catch at Low Carb Denver, but that was one of the first places I had to cancel because of COVID. So
Yeah.
I had some big A-listers, including Taubes. He was on a lot of good interviews I was going to be getting that didn't happen. Stupid virus. If that virus hadn't come around, then yeah, we'd have that thing cut by this summer for sure.
Okay. Well, now that we got off on that tangent. All right. So anything else you wanted to talk about? Or are you ready to go to bed?
No,
I'm
actually,
gonna go to bed.
the
It's my bedtime.
yeah, and the missus is probably going to get on me because we're supposed to watch The Crown soon. So
What the heck? Well, Miriam wants to say something.
Yeah, I want to say something. Every time we hang out together, I am so grateful for the work that you're doing and how amazing my body is, because my body can do so many awesome things. And you tell me about it, so I appreciate it.
Shuttling around lipids inside of these little phospholipid protein boats.
With all these weird names and all this cool stuff. And our bodies are pretty darn amazing. And for all the things that they do wrong, they do a lot of things right, and more things right than wrong, I think.
Yeah.
We just forget sometimes.
Yeah.
well, let me leave you on that note. Let me leave you with just one last factoid. If you grabbed a big, huge clump
Hold on
of
a second,
sand,
Dave. This
Yes.
is a fact. A factoid is something that's false, that's repeated so frequently it's accepted as true. Okay. This is a factet.
Okay. Well, it's not actually.
Sorry.
So if you grab a big clump of sand,
Yeah.
do you think that would be approximately how many lipoproteins you had in your body that your body made in your bloodstream?
Ask me.
I'm going to guess no.
Not asking Siobhan, she already knows the answer. So
No.
that's no, it's not. I want to say a big handful of sand is something like 500,000, something like that. Now what about a beach, like a beach in Australia? If you can think of all the kernels of sand in a beach.
How long is this beach? Is it like 7 kilometers?
Yeah, let's say 7 kilometers.
Okay. I don't know how big a kilometer is. So I'm going to guess again. No.
No, you're right. No. Okay. How about the continent of Australia? How about all of the beaches in the continent of Australia?
Oh, wow. Maybe yes.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Okay. How
Okay.
about the Sahara Desert?
Yes.
No, actually.
Dang it.
No, actually, your body turns over in 2 weeks about as many lipoproteins as there are grains of sand in every beach and desert around the world.
Really?
The whole
Yes.
world. All the world.
Okay. What's that number, by the way?
It's measured in something called quintillions, and a quintillion is a million trillions. So it's a 1 with 18 zeros behind it.
Okay, I was about to say, let's just use scientific notation
That's
at
a
this
lot
point,
of
man. 1 with
Yeah,
18 zeros. That's how
So
many lipoproteins you go through in 2 weeks, you said?
Yeah, it's how much you turn over in 2 weeks. So if you were to, what's estimated, the total grains of sand across the world is around 7.5 quintillion. That's about, when I worked out the math, that's about the turnover of just 2 weeks of what your body makes in lipoproteins.
That's nuts.
It is nuts.
See, our bodies are so cool, right?
I think they are. I think that's pretty amazing. And for one thing, it definitely gives me a sense of prioritization. So there's definitely an interest on the part of my body in making sure it's got a lot of boats in the harbor. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. So when you think
are these ones that your body is creating from scratch, essentially?
That's why I say turnover. So 2 weeks of what turns over. Now, I will throw in a little bit of a caveat. Siobhan and I kind of go back and forth on this one a little bit. I suspect that a fraction of those are recycled. The lipoproteins are recycled and do not There's something where it degrades it. It's like the acid bath organelle in your cells called a lysosome. Some of them, I think, escape the lysosome, and there's some science behind that. How much of it is in a low carb context, we don't know yet. But tracer studies will help us find out eventually. So anyway, that's the gist. But I wanted to leave you with that. And thank you for having us on. You know what? We'll come on again at some point. I'm sure we'll have more data to discuss. So this was fun.
We're here every Tuesday night, man.
Anytime you want to talk.
Although predominantly it's during like a presidential debate
yeah.
or a State of the Union. Those are always on Tuesdays. I don't know why.
I don't think that's going to happen anymore for a long time. So
probably not. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both for coming on. You guys have a fantastic evening.
You too.
You know what's left of it, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Bye,
See you guys later.
everybody.
Bye.